So imagine a CEO who basically controls the strategic trajectory of hundreds of independent organizations.
Right.
And they direct, millions of dollars in resources. They fundamentally shape the daily lives of thousands of people. But here's the catch. They don't actually have the legal authority to fire a single employee in that entire network.
Which is, that's just wild to think about.
It really is. Like if they issue a sweeping directive, anyone in the room can just stand up, walk away, and completely ignore them.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, no one does. In fact, people flock to them.
It's the ultimate paradox of power, really.
Yeah.
You are describing a system where authority is just entirely uncoupled from traditional jurisdiction.
Exactly. Because, well, usually when we think about power, we expect a blueprint, right? We expect visibility.
Yeah.
You look at a massive corporation or a government or a military, and there's a clean binary organizational chart.
The chain of command?
Right. The president or the CEO is at the top, the middle managers fall in line below them, and the frontline workers are at the base. You just point your finger at the chart and say, there it is, that's who's in charge. It's hierarchical, and I think it's comforting because it makes sense.
Oh, totally. But the reality is the most potent forms of influence in the modern world are completely abandoning that model.
And that is exactly what we are exploring today. So welcome to this deep dive. I want you, the listener, to just picture Singapore for a second. It is a hyper-modern, densely populated city-state. It is a massive global financial hub, incredibly famous for its extreme efficiency, its gleaming skyscrapers, and its highly managed, top-down bureaucracy.
Yeah, everything is planned.
Everything. But today, we are pivoting to a deeply surprising topic. We're looking at a profound sociological and religious phenomenon happening right within its borders.
It's a fascinating shift.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore how power, authority, and influence actually function in Singapore's evangelical ecosystem. We are looking at a landscape where traditional top-down hierarchies they do not exist. And yet somehow, ideas generated on this tiny island spread globally with a massive, undeniable impact.
Right. And to properly set the stage for you, we really have to look at the baseline context from the sociological and historical research we're working with here.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, in Singapore today, Christians make up roughly 18% of the population, but the structural organization of this incredibly active demographic completely defies traditional, what we would call episcopal or top-down models of governance.
So no single boss.
Exactly. You simply do not have a single overriding religious CEO or a localized pope issuing mandates. Instead, this entire ecosystem relies on incredibly complex, highly concentrated, but entirely informal networks.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because what we have in this research is, it's a literal masterclass in networked authority.
Oh, absolutely.
And the reason I am so insanely excited to dive into these sources is that this concept, how influence flows without formal titles, how an idea scales from a single room to multiple countries, it applies to so much more than just religion.
Yeah, it really does.
It applies to how ideas scale anywhere. If you want to understand the future of global influence, whether you work in tech, media, or middle management, you have to understand what is happening here. So let's start with this blueprint.
Sounds good.
To understand this invisible network, the source material points us to a very specific paradigmatic case study. We're looking at Reverend Edmund Chan and the Covenant Evangelical Free Church, or CEFC. And I have to say, the origin story here is almost shockingly humble.
It truly is. If you want to understand how a movement scales, you have to look at where it began. The trajectory of CEFC operates as a perfect microcosm for the broader shifts in Singaporean evangelicalism over the last, few decades. If we go back to 1978, this church, which was originally called Emmanuel Christian Fellowship, was established by the Evangelical Free Church of Singapore with a grand total of 17 pioneer members.
Wait, just 17 people?
Just 17?
Think about that.
Yeah.
You can fit the entire organization in a minivan.
Exactly. And for the first decade of their existence, they didn't even have a building. They were an entirely nomadic fellowship.
Wow.
Yeah, they met in rented restaurant spaces, they booked out secular theaters, they squeezed into the private living rooms of their members. It was as grassroots and resource scarce as an organization can possibly be.
Building momentum in that kind of fragmented environment, especially in a fast-paced city like Singapore, that is incredibly difficult.
Oh, it's nearly impossible for most.
And the turning point, the moment the match strikes the gasoline, according to the research, hits in 1987. That is when a young Edmund Chan assumes the role of senior pastor. And what fascinated me reading through these notes is the strategic shift he initiates right out of the gate. Because normally, when a church or any organization really wants to grow, they focus on what the sources call attractional evangelism.
Yeah, the classic model.
It's basically the event planning model, right? Put on a great show, get the best music, host the most exciting speakers, and just get as many warm bodies through the door as humanly possible.
It's a focus purely on volume, but Chan completely rejected that premise. He anchored his entire vision on a specific ancient biblical promise from the book of Isaiah, chapter 60, verse 22, which simply says, "A little one shall become 1,000."
Right, and you might hear that and think, well, okay, so he just wanted to grow from 17 to 1,000. That's still volume, right?
Right.
But it's how that changes everything.
Yes, exactly. The crucial distinction here is the mechanism of that growth. He didn't want what he called spiritual addition. He wanted spiritual multiplication. He introduced and fiercely championed the concept of intentional disciple-making.
You know, if we think about this in modern business terms, it is exactly like a tech startup sitting down and deciding to focus entirely on deep user retention and organic viral growth.
Right.
Rather than just dumping, tens of millions of venture capital dollars into your new user acquisition. Like if you're building an app, you don't just want 1 million free users who log in once, look around, and delete the app.
They are useless to you.
Totally useless. You want 1,000 super users,
Right.
people who are so deeply transformed by the product that they go out and organically bring in 10 people each.
Mm-hmm.
And then those 10 people are trained to bring in 10 more.
It's an exponential growth model.
Exactly. Built entirely on depth, not breadth.
That is a highly accurate analogy. And by shifting the core organizational metric away from mere weekend attendance and toward deep transformational multiplication, the historical results were staggering.
Yeah, the numbers are crazy.
Under Chan's leadership, they rebranded to Covenant Evangelical Free Church in 1992, which was a very public signal of this new missional focus. And from those initial nomadic 17 members meeting in restaurants, they grew into the absolute largest congregation in their denomination in Singapore.
That's incredible.
We are talking about a weekly attendance today of approximately 6,000 members spread across multiple massive physical centers and digital platforms. And remarkably, as the sociologists note in the research, they funded their massive multi-million-dollar building expansions without relying on bank loans.
No bank loans.
Oh.
For a multi-campus expansion in Singapore?
Yeah, pretty unheard of.
I mean, Singapore is routinely ranked as one of the most expensive real estate markets on the planet. That fact alone speaks volumes. It speaks to the level of deep personal commitment and, frankly, the deep pockets that this specific model of internal transformation generated among its members. But let's get to the core of why this worked so effectively. The sources detail Chan's primary theological diagnosis, which he famously labeled a crisis of product in the modern global church.
What's fascinating here is that Chan essentially looked out at the massive global evangelical landscape, looked at the megachurches springing up everywhere and said, we are succeeding at the wrong thing. He argued that modern churches were incredibly successful at gathering massive crowds, at generating hype and excitement, but they were fundamentally failing at their core mandate.
Which is to produce authentic, mature disciples of their faith.
Exactly. He called this modern tragedy the truncated gospel.
The truncated gospel. It's such a striking phrase. It's like a dealership selling you a multi-million-dollar high-performance sports car.
Right.
But when you open the hood, they left out the engine.
Right.
It looks absolutely incredible sitting in the showroom. You can charge a premium for it, but the second you try to take it out on the highway, it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah, it's just a show.
And what I appreciate is that he didn't just stand on a stage and point out a vague problem. He surgically broke it down. Our research details 5 specific structural flaws of modern discipleship that Chan identified.
And they are very precise.
Yeah, and I want us to walk through these slowly because as I was reading them, I realized they're incredibly insightful critiques of human behavior, even entirely outside of a religious context.
Oh, for sure.
So let's look at flaw number 1, treating discipleship as an outside-in behavioral modification rather than an inside-out transformation.
This is a profound psychological insight, really. This is the difference between simply following a rigid set of external rules to look acceptable to your community versus experiencing a fundamental molecular shift in your internal character.
Yeah, just faking it till you make it, basically.
Right, because behavioral modification is incredibly fragile. It relies on peer pressure and willpower, and it inevitably breaks under pressure or when no one is watching. True, inside-out transformation is resilient. It changes the person's default settings.
It's the difference between painting over the rust on a car versus actually replacing the metal. Eventually, the rust bleeds through the paint.
Exactly.
Okay, flaw number 2, reducing this process to mere knowledge transfer rather than applied truth. This feels like the classic trap of the modern information age.
Oh, we all do this.
We really do. We think because we've read the best-selling book on leadership or we've listened to a 3-hour podcast on productivity, we've actually achieved the goal.
Right, you feel productive just by consuming it.
Exactly. But Chan is saying if the sudden influx of knowledge doesn't actively change how you live your daily life, it's completely useless. It's just trivia.
Precisely. And that leads directly into flaw number 3, which he identifies as missing the mandate of abiding in Christ and the desperate rush to accomplish the mission.
Explain that one a bit.
So sociologically, in a highly pragmatic, relentlessly results-driven society like Singapore, where efficiency is almost a cultural religion in itself, the temptation is always to focus heavily on the output.
Right, the KPIs.
Exactly. You focus on the metrics, the attendance numbers, the size of the events. Chan argued that religious leaders were getting so relentlessly busy doing the work for God that they entirely forgot to actually connect with God.
Wow. I mean, if you are listening to this and you work in the corporate world, you probably just got chills.
Yeah, it's very relatable.
Because I know so many executives who suffer from exactly that. They are so busy managing the company's mission statement that they destroy their own mental health and their families. It's the sheer danger of burnout disguised as heroic productivity.
It is a universal human trap, and he identified it as a fatal flaw in the religious ecosystem.
Then we have flaw number 4, delinking evangelism from discipleship, meaning you put all your resources into getting people in the door, you throw a massive party to celebrate their arrival, and then you just leave them there to figure it out on their own.
Yes. It's a dynamic we will explore more deeply later, often referred to as the triage model.
Right, the emergency room thing.
Exactly. You stabilize the trauma patient in the emergency room so they don't die today, but you do absolutely nothing to cure the underlying chronic disease, and you provide no physical therapy to train them how to walk again.
And finally, flaw number 5, substituting genuine spiritual depth with regimental programmatic journeys.
Now, this is perhaps his sharpest, most piercing critique of modern organizational behavior.
Really?
How so?
Well, it is the very corporate assumption that if you just put someone through a standardized 6-week course, give them a fill-in-the-blank workbook, and hand them a printed certificate at the end, they are now a fully formed, mature disciple.
Like a training module at work.
Right. Chan vehemently pushed back against this industrial mindset. He argued that you cannot mass-produce spiritual maturity on an assembly line. It requires grueling, messy, individual relational investment.
So he identifies these 5 massive structural flaws in the global system. But he doesn't just write a complaining op-ed about it. He builds a comprehensive system to fix it at his local church level.
Right, he actually implements it.
But here is where the story pivots. The real magic of this deep dive, the reason we are analyzing this, is how this local bespoke philosophy went global. It didn't stay safely inside the 4 walls of CEFC.
No, it rapidly and aggressively scaled.
No.
By 1995, CEFC started hosting annual disciple-making seminars. They took the hard-won lessons they were learning on the ground, the mistakes and the successes, and they opened their doors to other church leaders.
So they shared the playbook.
Exactly. And those initial localized seminars evolved into the very first formal Intentional Disciplemaking Church, or IDMC, conference in 2001.
And then 7 years after that, in 2008, it becomes heavily institutionalized on a global scale. They officially launched the Global Alliance of Intentional Disciplemaking Churches.
Correct. The IDMC conference isn't just a local Singaporean gathering anymore. It attracts thousands upon thousands of delegates from over 20 different countries annually. In the span of a few decades, CEFC transformed itself from a local nomadic congregation of 17 people into a primary, undeniable global theological hub. Which brings us to the ultimate flex of informal power. This is the moment in the research that literally made me stop reading and sit up in my chair.
Oh, the succession.
Yes. The year's 2012. Edmund Chan has been the senior pastor for 25 years. He has built this massive organization from nothing. He has launched a global movement. He is at the absolute apex of his influence. And what does he do? He steps down.
He does. He orchestrates a highly deliberate, highly publicized leadership succession. He officially hands the executive pastoral mantle, the CEO title essentially, over to his successors, Reverend Tony Yeo and Reverend Tangke Keong.
But he doesn't retire to a beach to play golf.
No. He takes on a newly created, almost ethereal title, leadership mentor.
And I have to pause the narrative here and ask you, sociologically, structurally, what is happening in this moment? Because in almost every other context I can think of, stepping out of the CEO role, giving up the corner office means giving up your power. You become a figurehead.
What's fascinating here is that this move definitively proves the core thesis of networked authority. His real power is entirely relational, not positional.
Wait, explain how that works.
Well, by unteggering himself from the grueling local administrative duties, the exhausting day-to-day operations of managing human resources for a 6,000-person church, dealing with building maintenance, managing local staff disputes, he actually exponentially expanded his influence.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, he freed his schedule and his cognitive load to focus entirely on global disciple-making and, crucially, mentoring top-tier leaders across multiple different denominations.
Oh, wow. So he essentially stopped managing the frontline workers so
Yeah.
he could become the mentor to all the other CEOs.
Exactly. He elevated himself from a practitioner to a master architect of paradigms. His power in this ecosystem is derived from his immense relational capital, his extensive publishing portfolio, and his undeniable proven track record.
That's brilliant.
It is. By stepping down from the positional title, he proved his own thesis, that the ultimate delivery system of these life-changing ideas isn't a printed curriculum, and it isn't a formal job title.
It's the person.
The ultimate delivery system is the lived, authentic experience of the mentor. That specific ethos, that influence is relational, not positional, has deeply permeated the entire Singaporean evangelical consciousness.
Okay, so that perfectly establishes how this incredible influence is built by a single visionary. But we need to transition to the environment that allowed this to happen in the first place. We have to look at the power vacuum.
Ah, yes, segment 2.
Because if I am listening to this right now, my immediate burning question is, why was this networked, mentor-driven, complex approach necessary at all? If there was this massive theological crisis of product, why didn't the person in charge, the reigning bishop or the archbishop, just issue a memo, mandate a new standardized curriculum for everyone, and be done with it?
Because, simply put, in this specific Protestant ecosystem, that person with the memo does not exist.
There is no boss.
There is no overriding boss. To understand why visionary leaders like Chan are elevated to such stratospheric heights of influence, we have to do a quick, vital dive into Ecclesiology 101. We need to understand the structural reality of how Protestant churches govern themselves.
Right. We need to look at the invisible org chart.
Precisely. In older, more traditional religious structures like the Anglican or the Roman Catholic Church, you have what sociologists and theologians call an episcopal or hierarchical model.
Okay.
Power is strictly centralized. You have bishops, you have synods, you have formal geographical dioceses mapped out with borders. If a local church in that specific system needs a new direction, or if a pastor goes rogue, the bishop mandates a change and strict canonical law enforces it. It is top-down and it is legally binding.
But our sources highlight that the massive evangelical landscape in Singapore is heavily populated by denominations that utilize something called congregational polity.
Yes. Congregational polity flips the hierarchical model completely upside down. It places the supreme governing power directly into the hands of the local church members.
So democracy, basically.
Basically, yeah. There is no external bishop. The research we are looking at specifically points to the Evangelical Free Church of Singapore, the EFCS, and the Singapore Baptist Convention, the SBC, as prime examples.
Let's look deeply at those two examples because the contrast is stark. The EFCS functions as a national coordinating body for 11 different member churches. It sounds like a headquarters.
It does sound like one.
But the source text explicitly states that each individual local church is entirely self-governing. They are overseen by their own local board of elders with zero legal or administrative interference from the central body.
Right. And the Singapore Baptist Convention is even more emphatic and protective about this structure. They represent 37 member churches across the city, and they fiercely, aggressively protect their local autonomy based on deeply rooted, centuries-old Protestant Reformation theology.
Theology like what?
Well, they hold to foundational doctrines like the priesthood of all believers and individual soul liberty.
Okay, individual soul liberty sounds incredibly poetic. But But what does that actually mean in practical administrative terms?
In practical terms, it means that they fundamentally believe that absolutely no religious hierarchy outside their local church building has the legal, moral, or spiritual right to govern their internal beliefs, select their pastoral leadership, or tell them how to spend their tithe money.
Wow, okay.
The local congregation holds a vote, and that vote is final. The convention is just a fellowship. It is not a boss.
Okay, I see the appeal of this. This structure perfectly prevents a dictatorship. It protects a local community from being exploited by a corrupt or rogue bishop living hundreds of miles away.
Exactly.
But it also creates a massive, undeniable structural paradox. Complete freedom at scale creates a complete vacuum.
It does.
Because human institutions, whether it's a church, a multinational corporation, or a local community theater group, they still inherently crave leadership. They still desperately need strategic direction. And in this specific religious case, they need robust doctrinal anchoring.
This is the absolute crux of the sociological analysis in our sources. The structural vacuum demands to be filled. These local, fiercely independent churches inevitably face complex cultural shifts, financial hurdles, and organizational challenges.
Right.
They realize they need high-level resources. They need mentorship to survive. But because of their congregational polity, they don't have a formal, well-funded headquarters to turn to.
And so into that massive void steps the de facto bishop.
Precisely. In these localized congregational ecosystems, informal authority naturally and inevitably accrues to the rare individuals who can provide what the fragmented system lacks.
Like Chan.
Exactly. If you have a leader who possesses unusually high theological clarity, magnetic charismatic communication skills, and a highly visible, proven track record of organizational success, someone exactly like an Edmund Chan, they naturally fill that void. They become the gravity that pulls the independent planets into an orbit.
But let me push back on this because this is the exact part of the research that tripped me up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If these local Baptist or free churches so fiercely guard their legal independence, if their entire theological and historical identity is based on the pride of not being told what to do by an outside boss, why on earth do they so willingly submit themselves to these megachurch mentors?
That's a great question.
Right. Why do they spend their limited budgets to attend their conferences, adopt their frameworks, and essentially follow their lead? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of being independent?
It doesn't, because of the concept of the value exchange. The submission to these mentors is entirely voluntary, and it is entirely relational.
So it's not forced.
Not at all. The independent local pastor isn't signing a legally binding contract that surrenders their property rights. They are opting into a relationship because it provides immense, immediate, tangible value to their community.
Like what kind of value?
They get access to proven, cutting-edge church growth strategies. They get access to high-quality, beautifully produced curriculum that they could never afford to write or print themselves. And perhaps most importantly, from a sociological standpoint, they gain a sense of belonging to a broader, global, missional identity. They don't feel alone anymore.
So it's highly elastic.
It is the definition of elasticity. They can adopt all the teachings, utilize the resources, and proudly align themselves with the mentor's global movement, all without surrendering a single ounce of their legal constitutional autonomy.
So things go south.
If the local church decides they disagree with the mentor tomorrow, or if the mentor takes a direction they don't like, they can simply stop returning calls and walk away without any legal repercussions.
It is genuinely brilliant. It's an informal hierarchy that only survives and thrives as long as the leader at the top continues to provide overwhelming value to the people at the bottom.
Right.
It's almost a pure free market approach to spiritual authority. These visionary mentors essentially direct the trajectory of hundreds of fiercely independent congregations without ever possessing the power to issue a single official decree.
Exactly, and that is why their authority must be constantly maintained through relational proximity, continuous innovation, and mutual alignment, rather than resting lazily on jurisdictional law.
All right, so we know who holds the power in this landscape, the visionary mentors who generate the ideas. And we know why they hold it, because congregational independence inherently creates a structural vacuum for high-level leadership.
Right.
Now we need to look at the transmission engine. How do these complex theological ideas actually travel across rigid denominational lines? Because having a great idea is useless if it doesn't move.
Moving ideas at this scale requires a highly robust, intentionally overlapping infrastructure. You cannot just rely on organic word of mouth if you want to change the culture of a nation.
So what does that look like?
In Singapore, This infrastructure is built on a dense, overlapping ecosystem of interdenominational platforms, massive conferences, and specialized parachurch organizations.
Let's outline these platforms because the history of how they formed is really fascinating. The research notes the Evangelical Fellowship of Singapore, or EFOS, which was formed way back in 1980.
Yes.
And the catalyst for that formation was the historic 1978 Billy Graham Crusade. That massive stadium event essentially forced a bunch of disparate, isolated churches to cooperate logistics for the first time.
They had no choice.
Right. And after it was over, they wisely decided to keep that cooperative machinery running. Then, jumping forward, you have more recent, highly targeted aggregators, like the Alliance of Pentecostal and Charismatic Churches of Singapore, which was formed in 2018.
These formal alliances are absolutely critical nodes in the network. On the surface, if you read their charters, they act as representational bodies to the state, which is vital in a highly managed society like Singapore, so the government has a point of contact for a demographic.
Makes sense.
But sociologically, internally, their real function is to serve as crucibles for high-level relationship building. They succeed in getting all the senior pastors into the exact same room on a regular basis.
And that's where the magic happens.
Exactly. Once you have the key decision-makers in the room, sharing a meal and building trust, theological ideas and successful ministry models can be exchanged and adopted at lightning speed.
And our sources highlight a very recent, very targeted development on this exact front. Just recently, in March 2024, they launched the Disciplemaking Alliance in Singapore.
Yes, and the formation of this specific alliance is a direct response to a shared growing anxiety across the network.
What were they anxious about?
Well, leaders across various denominations were looking at the internal data and feeling a deep sense that the wider church was plateauing. They felt that comfortable congregational maintenance was slowly replacing the urgent mandate of true disciple-making.
Going back to Chan's critique.
Exactly. So, top-tier leaders from CEFC, alongside former presidents of the National Council of Churches, and with Edmund Chan acting as a senior advisor, purposefully built this new transmission line explicitly to aggressively export the disciple-making mandate.
And they codified this entire movement with what they call their FIRM values. Let me read these off and unpack them because it shows exactly how structured and exportable this informal influence is.
Please do.
The F stands for formational, which means focusing on transforming individuals into Christ-likeness. Go back to that inside-out transformation we discussed earlier.
Right.
The I is for intentional, meaning prioritizing disciple-making above just running random church programs. The R is relational, investing life on life, being deeply involved in each other's struggles. And the M is missional, meaning multiplying disciple makers and planting new churches.
FIRM.
It's a very clean, highly memorable, easily exportable framework.
It really is. But an alliance at the end of the day is just a network of leaders. How does the message actually get loud enough for the average person in the pew to hear it? That is where the megaphones of the ecosystem come into play. The primary megaphones in this network are the massive, highly produced annual conferences. We already briefly mentioned the IDMC conference, which regularly draws upwards of 4,500 highly engaged attendees.
Right.
But the ambition and the influence of these networks stretches far beyond Singapore's physical borders.
Yeah, the research points to an upcoming event, the 2026 Asia Conference on Church and Mission, the ACCM, being held in Manila. And this is where the source material gets incredibly spicy. We get to that searing, uncompromising critique from Dr. Bambang Budihanto.
Oh, yes.
This part of the text was incredible to read. He gave a major address themed Disciple or Die 3.0.
Disciple or Die. It's an intentionally provocative title meant to shake the audience awake. Dr. Budihanto, representing the immense scope of the Asia Evangelical Alliance, stood up and argued that for the last 2 centuries, modern global missions had operated on a deeply, fundamentally flawed triage methodology.
Triage. You want to pause on this analogy because it's so powerful. When we hear triage, we think of an emergency room in a hospital after a major disaster.
Right.
The medics are completely overwhelmed. They aren't trying to cure anyone's long-term cholesterol or fix a chronic back issue. They're just trying to stop the bleeding, save the patient's life in that exact second, and then they immediately sprint to the next bleeding patient.
Exactly. And the theological equivalent of triage missions, according to Budihanto, is focusing entirely on the immediate, urgent crisis of evangelism, getting a person saved or converted in a single emotional moment, but then completely failing to stick around and nurture a deep, long-term reproductive faith.
So just treating the symptom.
You treat the immediate spiritual crisis, you mark it as a success on your spreadsheet, but you provide zero long-term rehabilitation. Burihanto argued passionately that this hyper-focus on triage has ultimately led to a geographically vast but incredibly weak and fragile church across Asia.
So these massive conferences act as the megaphone to broadcast these sharp critiques and to offer the localized solutions. But an event, no matter how inspiring, is only a few days long.
Right.
People go home, they get tired, and they forget. How do they codify this energy so it actually lasts?
Through the strategic use of publishing and the integration of specialized parachurch ministries, Christian publishing houses, specifically entities like Cru Media Ministry in Singapore, are the vital arteries here.
Okay, so printing books.
Yeah, they take the ephemeral oral teachings and the fiery conference keynotes, and they carefully codify them into accessible, highly reproducible books and workbooks.
Like Chan's massive catalog of books, A Certain Kind, Growing Deep in God, Mentoring Paradigms.
Yes. These physical books transcend the geographical and temporal limits of the physical conference. They become the foundational, standardized texts used in seminaries, in pastoral training, and in small living room groups internationally.
That makes sense.
And operating right alongside the publishing wing, you have parachurch groups organizations like Focus on the Family or the Biblical Graduate School of Theology. They provide the highly specialized operational support, counseling, and deep theological education that a small, independent local church just simply cannot afford to generate internally.
It's a total seamless symbiosis. The megachurch provides the grand vision and the massive audience. The parachurch organization provides the highly specialized, scalable tools, and the independent local church eagerly consumes it all to solve their local problems.
Absolutely.
But we have to step back for a second and ask the big underlying geographical question. Why Singapore? Out of all the places in Asia, why is this tiny, resource-scarce island nation the undisputed hub for all of this massive networked influence?
If we want to connect this to the bigger picture, we have to zoom out and look at the macro, geopolitical, and demographic drivers. The true historical catalyst for this ecosystem actually dates all the way back to 1949 with the Communist Revolution in China.
Wait, China. See, when I read that in the outline, that seemed like a massive, disconnected leap. How does a violent political revolution in China dictate the church structure in modern-day Singapore?
It's all about the displacement of capital and talent. When the 1949 revolution happened, the new regime was hostile to foreign religious influence.
Right.
This triggered a massive, desperate exodus of Protestant missionary agencies, highly educated theologians, and financial resources completely out of mainland China. They suddenly needed a new, stable base of operations in Asia.
So they looked south.
They looked at the map, and they relocated to Singapore, explicitly envisioning the strategic port city as the new Cold War Chinese Christian hub for the entire region.
Oh, wow.
This sudden massive influx of intellectual resources, foreign funding, and displaced theological talent directly led to the rapid establishment of key foundational institutions on the island, like Trinity Theological College and the Singapore Bible College. Almost overnight, Singapore became the primary high-level site for educating and reproducing Asian Christian elites.
Wow. So global geopolitics essentially forced this massive infrastructure into existence on this tiny island.
Exactly.
And that specific history birthed a very powerful, enduring narrative trope that the sociological sources highlight over and over again, the idea of Singapore as the Antioch of Asia.
Yes, Antioch is a profound historical reference. Antioch was the ancient biblical city that served as the cosmopolitan, multicultural launching pad for the Apostle Paul's massive global missionary journeys.
So they see themselves as that launching pad.
Framing modern Singapore as the new contemporary Antioch is a profoundly powerful prophetic narrative. It serves to give every single local congregation, no matter how small, a vital transnational purpose. Suddenly, your local church attendance on a Sunday morning isn't just about your specific neighborhood. It's framed as a matter of immense global spiritual significance.
And the raw numbers actually back up the ambition. The research estimates that Singaporean churches send out one fully funded cross-cultural missionary for every 1.4 congregations.
Which is staggering.
That is an absolutely astonishing, almost unbelievable ratio of export for any nation.
It is truly exceptional, and a leading scholar, Robbie Goh, theorizes exactly how this is possible through a framework he calls Christian capital.
Let's pause and really define that, because when I hear the word capital, my brain just immediately defaults to bank accounts.
Sure.
I just think of these megachurches having massive real estate budgets. Are we just talking about cash?
Well, Money is certainly a foundational part of it. The megachurches in Singapore exist in a very wealthy society and have significant financial wealth at their disposal. But Go argues that true Christian capital encompasses so much more than a bank balance.
What else is there?
It is the intangible, highly potent, situational, relational, human, social, and influential wealth that is uniquely created in this specific, high-functioning urban context. Remember, Singapore is a top-tier global financial center. It possesses world-class logistics, unparalleled technological infrastructure, and deep, stable economic frameworks. The evangelical networks simply and brilliantly utilize the exact same capitalist logistical infrastructure that makes Singapore a banking hub to rapidly and efficiently export their theology, their books, and their media to the broader global south.
So they are riding the slipstream of the country's secular efficiency.
Exactly.
But what does this all mean for the actual human being sitting in the pew? The sources dive deeply into the sociological context of the modern Singaporean citizen. This is a highly educated, deeply pragmatic, and generally affluent society.
Yes.
But sociologist Daniel P.S. Goh points out a darker side to this success. He notes that all this hypermodernity, the blistering pace of rapid industrialization, the physical and emotional distantiation from traditional rural cultural roots, inevitably leads to a profound sense of modern existential anxiety.
And this anxiety is exactly where the networked megachurch thrives and finds its immense appeal. Consider the environment. You have a highly managed, densely populated bureaucratic state that carefully and strictly polices public expression in order to maintain societal harmony.
Yeah, everything is by the book.
It is safe, but it can feel incredibly sterile. In that environment, people are desperately searching for deep meaning, for absolute unchanging truth, and for what sociologists term an effective community.
Hold on. Effective community. Let's translate that into layman's terms. Does that basically mean that people living in a highly strict, hyper-efficient, bureaucratic city are just desperate for a place where they are actually allowed to show real emotion and be vulnerable?
Essentially, yes. An effective community provides deep emotional resonance, a sense of belonging, and an environment where you are known intimately, rather than just being a cog in an economic machine.
And the data emphatically proves they are finding exactly that in these networks. The Institute of Policy Studies, the widely respected IPS survey, shows a fascinating trend.
It really does.
While much of the highly developed, affluent Western world is rapidly secularizing and abandoning traditional religion, Singapore retains exceptionally high levels of religiosity. Over 74% of the population actively follows a religion.
Wow.
And among Christians specifically, core theological beliefs remain overwhelmingly strong across multiple generations. The dynamic, emotionally engaging, highly visionary environment of these network churches offers individuals a profound sense of personal agency and transcendental meaning in an otherwise highly structured, predictable world.
It is a highly effective ecosystem. However, we must analyze the entire picture. Any system that relies this heavily on dynamic, visionary leaders and operates largely outside of formal legal oversight naturally and inevitably generates profound internal tension.
And that brings us to the most complex part of our deep dive today, the paradox of personality. Because a system built entirely on the charisma and the vision of individuals absolutely has to have a dark side.
It does. To understand the friction, we have to look closely at the massive tension between the theological ideal they preach and the sociological reality of how they operate.
Okay, let's look at the ideal first.
The absolute theological gold standard for these networks, the blueprint they all strive for, is rooted in the biblical text of Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 and 12.
Which mandates that the primary role of pastors and leaders is to equip the saints for the work of ministry.
Exactly. It explicitly demands a fully decentralized, highly empowered model. Every single lay congregant is supposed to be an empowered, active agent of the faith. Edmund Chan's entire life-on-life discipleship framework is obsessively designed to actualize this specific scripture.
Right.
He demands deep vulnerability, inner brokenness, and intense, messy relational proximity. In his model, the goal isn't to produce a passive, happy follower who drops money in a plate. The goal is to continually reproduce a capable, active leader.
That is the beautiful ideal. But the reality on the ground, the unavoidable sociological reality of trying to scale a religious movement into the thousands and tens of thousands, frequently, violently contradicts that ideal.
It does.
The sources we are analyzing talk heavily about the rise of the experienced megachurch. And they note that the wider Asian church is currently facing a massive crisis of, quote, raising consumers, not disciples.
This happens because the experienced megachurch model fundamentally relies on incredibly high production weekend worship, highly sophisticated, expensive marketing campaigns, and an almost mandated posture of absolute invulnerability from the lead pastor.
They have to look perfect.
Right. Because when your authority is completely informal, when you don't have a legal title protecting you, your power becomes inherently dangerously tethered to the aesthetic appeal, the stage presence, and the rhetorical skill of the founder. If the founder looks weak, the network fractures.
Which is almost like watching a modern tech bro keynote presentation. The lighting, the music, the flawless aesthetic of the CEO is the authority. And this dynamic leads directly into what sociologist Daniel Piesco brilliantly calls the Christian Prince phenomenon. Now, before we dive into these specific examples, I should just throw in a quick, very explicit constraint reminder here, for you listening at home.
Good idea.
In this deep dive, we are looking at these events and these public figures strictly and impartially through the sociological lens provided by our research. We are not taking sides on any internal theological debates, we are not judging their faith, and we are not endorsing any specific pastoral critiques. We are simply reporting on how this fascinating ecosystem functions, how power dynamics play out, and how the network reacts to friction.
That is a very necessary caveat as we are discussing real, highly influential figures.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So tell us about the Christian Prince.
Go observes that in this highly concentrated, unregulated environment, driven leaders naturally vie to become the Christian Prince. These are larger-than-life figures who completely master the complex realities of stage power, digital media, and the immense flow of Asian capitalism.
Right.
The research specifically cites deeply influential local figures like Lawrence Hong and Joseph Prince as examples of this highly visible, personality-driven dynamic.
Joseph Prince is a particularly fascinating example of the network's internal informal tensions. He has built an absolutely massive, undeniable, global empire.
He really has.
It is largely based on highly mediatized, stadium-level preaching circuits and the incredibly lucrative sale of books and recorded sermons worldwide. But the sources note that his specific style and theology triggers fierce, sustained pushback from other local pastors within the wider Singaporean network.
Yes.
They openly critique what they call his hyper-grace teachings, accusing them of undermining the need for biblical repentance.
It perfectly illustrates how an informal network argues with itself. There is no bishop to settle the debate, so they battle it out via competing books, sermons, and conferences.
It's all out in the open.
Right. But the true existential danger of a personality-driven authority structure isn't just messy theological disagreement. It is acute structural vulnerability.
Wait, if these networks are growing this massively, and everything is tied to the charisma and the unchecked vision of a single mentor, without any external legal oversight, doesn't that inherently create a terrifying single point of failure?
It absolutely does.
What happens when the mentor goes completely off the rails?
That is the million-dollar question, and there is no greater, more tragic warning tale in the source material than the City Harvest Church fraud case.
Oh, this case.
Yes. This was a massive, highly publicized, devastating scandal involving the church's wildly charismatic founder, Kong Hee.
The details of this case in the research are staggering. Kong Hee and several of his closest associates were ultimately tried and convicted of criminally diverting 50 million Singapore dollars in dedicated church funds.
50 million?
And the money wasn't just pocketed, it was funneled into what they internally called the crossover project. This was ostensibly pitched to the congregation as a cutting-edge evangelistic effort to reach the secular world. But, practically, in reality, it involved massively financing the entirely secular Hollywood pop music career of his own wife, Sun Ho.
Yes. $50 million. And this happened structurally because of that dangerous blending of the prosperity gospel, aggressive secular marketing strategies, and most importantly for our specific sociological discussion, completely unquestioned, highly centralized pastoral authority.
This blows my mind. $50 million diverted to a pop career. How does a tragedy of that financial magnitude actually happen in an organization with thousands of educated professional members?
This raises the most important question of our entire discussion. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it ruthlessly exposes the fundamental, fatal structural flaw we discussed back in segment 2.
The power vacuum.
Remember the power vacuum. Remember congregational polity, because there is no formal, overseeing denominational bishop, there is literally no one with the legal, canonical authority to walk into City Harvest Church, demand an immediate audit, and censure a rogue pastor before things spiral completely out of control into criminality.
Right. The local board of directors was clearly either entirely complicit, legally compromised, or just totally ineffective against his charisma. And the outside evangelical network, all the other pastors who might have seen red flags, had absolutely no legal jurisdiction to step into his building and stop him.
Exactly. In a congregational, purely network system, you have deliberately removed the regulatory safety nets. Therefore, you have to rely entirely on market forces to self-correct the ecosystem.
Meaning, the only way to punish a bad actor is for other independent churches to simply withdraw their association, stop inviting them to speak, or, in the worst-case scenario, you just have to wait for the secular state authorities, the actual police and the financial regulators, to finally intervene.
Yes, and as the devastating City Harvest case definitively proved, market correction in a religious context is incredibly, agonizingly slow. By the time the market or the state correct the behavior, the financial damage is done and the social and reputational cost to the broader evangelical ecosystem is absolutely devastating. The public loses trust.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
This intense vulnerability is exactly why the Disciple-Making Alliance we talked about earlier is currently trying so desperately hard to differentiate true, sustainable influence, which they strictly define as tested character and deep relational investment, from mere shiny celebrity, which relies solely on platform, production value, and performance.
So we have seen the incredible global rise of the visionary mentors at the top. We've explored the massive, efficient transmission engine of conferences and publishing, and we've just looked at the very real structural dangers of celebrity culture and unchecked power.
We've covered a lot.
But let's move to the final crucial piece of this sociological puzzle: the grassroots pushback. Because the local churches, the 700 or so independent congregations actually doing the daily work in Singapore, they're not just passively, blindly accepting these top-down mega programs anymore, are they?
No, they are not. The ecosystem is actively maturing and learning from its past mistakes. The new mantra that is rapidly shifting through the network at the ground level now is this realization that just doing discipleship stuff, just running the programs, does not necessarily reproduce true disciples.
Right. They are waking up and realizing that a rigid copy-paste methodology, no matter how successful it was for Edmund Chan 30 years ago, has severe diminishing returns if it isn't adapted.
Precisely.
The research highlights a very specific growing resistance to what they call the academization of pastoral training. And there's a strong grassroots pushback against simply importing inherited, dense Western theological frameworks that just do not fit the grueling, exhausting pace of daily life for the average Asian worker.
Consequently, the very nature of how these models are transmitted has fundamentally shifted. It is no longer about a megachurch confidently selling a rigid, one-size-fits-all curriculum to a small church. It has moved heavily toward bespoke, highly consultative models. Influence is being forced to adapt to the reality of the ground level.
Give me a concrete example of what that looks like practically. How does a megachurch consult rather than dictate?
The sources highlight a fascinating new format called the Disciple-Making Church Models Showcase. These are dynamic events hosted at various mid-sized venues like the Bukit Panjang Methodist Church.
Okay, so smaller venues.
Right. Instead of having one untouchable megapastor giving a booming keynote address from a stage, they have multiple diverse churches present the highly specific why, what, and how of their localized messy journeys.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a rotational, peer-to-peer, highly collaborative approach. It humbly acknowledges that while the core theology might be universal, the actual daily methodology must aggressively adapt to a local church's specific size, budget, and unique demographic makeup.
They are moving away from treating people like programmable computers. They are shifting from strict programs to what the research warmly calls journeying partnerships.
Yeah, journeying.
The great example of this is Gospel-Light Christian Church's implementation of what they call life-on-life missional discipleship, or LOMMD. Instead of hosting a massive impersonal 6-week seminar in a sterile hall, it focuses intensely on small, guided conversations, extreme vulnerability, and organic, gradual growth over years.
Right.
They are weaving the concept into the actual messy fabric of the church community, rather than just treating it as a product to be consumed.
It is all about creating highly adaptable, deeply practical tools for the average, exhausted layperson.
And the absolute most practical, ground-level tool mentioned in the entire source text is the BLESS model. BLESS, it is an acronym that stands for Begin in Prayer, Listen to a Friend, Eat with a Friend, Serve a Friend, Share Testimony and Gospel.
It's very simple.
It is. I want to pause on the eat with a friend part. In a relentlessly fast-paced, hyper-efficient society like Singapore, where time is literally money, simply stopping your day to share a slow meal and actively listen to someone without an immediate agenda is a profoundly radical, countercultural act.
It really is.
It is the complete opposite of high-pressure transactional religious conversion tactics. It lowers the barrier entirely. You do not need a master's degree in theology to eat a bowl of noodles with a stressed-out coworker and just listen to them.
And establishing that incredibly low barrier to entry is absolutely essential for future-proofing the entire movement. If it requires a degree, it won't scale. Which brings up another final critical challenge identified in the sources, the looming threat of the Joshua syndrome.
The Joshua syndrome. I love how these networks name their specific anxieties.
Yeah, they're very good at branding it.
The Joshua syndrome refers to the historical pattern where massive success in one founding generation leads directly to spiritual amnesia and complacency in the very next generation. Basically, the visionary founders, like Chan, build this incredible world-changing network, but they fail to intentionally carefully transition the actual leadership, and the comfortable second generation completely forgets the desperate core mission that started it all.
To combat this inevitable human tendency, the pastoral networks in Singapore are getting highly proactive. They aren't waiting for a crisis.
What are they doing?
They regularly host high-level leadership gatherings specifically titled Beyond Horizons. The entire agenda of these meetings is to tackle the terrifying complexities of succession planning, to glean wisdom on how to take sabbaticals to prevent executive burnout, and to ensure that the generational transition of this delicate, informal authority is smooth.
That's smart.
They possess the deep self-awareness to recognize that if the authority of the network is tied only to the founding charismatic personality, the entire network dies the day the founder finally retires or passes away.
Which brings this entire fascinating discussion full circle. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to do a final, clarifying synthesis for you, the listener. The source text we've been using does an absolutely brilliant job of mapping this entire complex ecosystem using the precise language of secular network theory.
Yes, it maps out beautifully.
If we want to look at this invisible org chart we've been trying to visualize for the last hour, it really breaks down cleanly into 4 distinct functional layers.
Let's map it out clearly. First, at the very origin point, you have the nodes. These are the rare individual visionary thought leaders, the theological architects who possess the absolute highest levels of relational capital. People like Edmund Chan, Tan K. Keong, Keith Lai, they generate the ideas.
Second, dropping down a layer, you have the hubs. These are the massive institutional bases. The highly successful, wealthy megachurches like CEFC or the structured national coordinating bodies like IFOS.
Right.
They have the physical money, the massive staff teams, and the sprawling buildings required to actually incubate and test the vision generated by the nodes.
Third, moving outward are the transmission lines. These are the engineered mechanisms designed specifically to distribute the proven theology globally. This is the massive IDMC conferences, the newly formed Disciplemaking Alliance, and the relentless publishing output of Crew Media.
And finally, at the base, you have the receiving layers. This encompasses the estimated 700 independent, local, autonomous congregations spread across Singapore, the thousands of regional churches across the broader Asian continent, and ultimately the individual lay believers who are actually doing the quiet, unglamorous work of executing the BLESS lifestyle on the ground, sharing meals and listening to their neighbors.
Exactly. When you look at it this way, you see that authority here does not flow top-down through a legal chain of command. It flows laterally, organically, and purely relationally.
It's a living system.
It is. The visionary nodes generate the theological DNA. The well-funded hubs prove in real time that it actually works. The transmission lines carefully package it for export. And the receiving layers eagerly adopt it because it genuinely solves their pressing local problems. Now, as we've discussed, networked authority carries immense undeniable risks. It breeds the dangers of celebrity culture, and it fatally lacks formal regulatory safeguards, as we saw with the devastating City Harvest scandal.
Yeah, that was dark.
But despite those risks, it effectively, brilliantly solves the inherent constraints of congregational polity. It takes a structural lack of formal hierarchy, which should be a weakness, and it turns it into an incredibly agile, highly potent engine for massive regional and global influence.
It is a truly phenomenal, complex system to study. And it leaves me with this final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you go back to your day. We open this deep dive by talking about how comfortable we all are with highly visible org charts, with strict top-down corporate blueprints where the boss is clearly the boss.
Right.
But we've just spent this entire episode seeing how an informal, highly relational, completely voluntary web of authority has allowed a small, resource-scarce island's religious movement to punch incredibly far above its weight on the global stage.
That's powerful.
So, I want you to think about your own industry. Think about your workplace, your corporate structure, or even how you personally consume media, news, and information online. As traditional top-down corporate structures and rigid political hierarchies continue to dramatically fracture and lose the trust of the public in the modern world, is this exact model of networked authority becoming the absolute, inescapable blueprint for how all global influence will operate in the future?
That's the question.
A model driven entirely by charismatic nodes, wealthy resource hubs, and relational transmission lines, built on voluntary value exchange. As we move forward, is the invisible org chart the only one that actually matters anymore? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning how influence truly shapes your world.